you have to take some calculated risks in order to achieve financial independence at some point in time. For some people, that is investing in stocks or other things, and for other people, it's starting businesses. But that was really ingrained in me from a very young age. Started cleaning houses for CEOs and VCs and in San Francisco in the morning, and sometimes they would have a chat with me and give me some advice, and they would say, "You don't look like my usual house cleaner."
Welcome, millionaires and future millionaires. You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, the show where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their portfolio allocation. Now to your host, Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 410.
This is the podcast where we dive deep into the inspiring stories of self-made millionaires from all walks of life. We are your hosts, Jason and Stacy, and each week we uncover the strategies, setbacks, and turning points that led these individuals to financial freedom. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up your wealth building journey, join us as we share the secrets and wisdom from those who have built their fortunes from the ground up. Get ready to learn, be inspired, and take actionable steps towards your own success.
Listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with my dad, Jace Madison, and my mom, Stacy Madison.
Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. We're always looking for new, great, entertaining guests willing to share their stories, as always. And yeah, it's been an interesting a few weeks here, and I guess even more last week. I feel like a lot of the gains that were lost over the tariffs have now kind of rebounded a little bit. But nonetheless, the interviews that we are conducting now that will be released later this year, or later this quarter really, maybe into the third quarter here, we've been able to have a little discussion about some mindset changes, if any, in some cases. Some haven't. About their investment strategies and stuff. So interesting time with a little bit of volatility and what millionaires do with their money and how they think about it during periods like this. And obviously we've had rising interest rates and I guess stable interest rates for the most part for the last little bit. But it's a far cry from where things were 2-3 years ago. And that's a not too far of a distant memory yet. So at any rate, today on the show, we have Daniel. He's got a net worth of $10+ million. He's got a remarkable story. Started out, he's actually a child of some immigrants from Poland and started out in the hedge fund world and then transitioned into cleaning houses, believe it or not, for a little while in Silicon Valley before he was able to get some startups off the ground and became a startup entrepreneur and CEO. So going to be a great a great episode with him. Most of his net worth is tied up in his companies, but he does have some other investments that we discuss. And without any further delay, let's get right in the episode with Daniel.
Daniel, do you want to just give us about your background and what you're up to now?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Jace. My background is I started my career as an entrepreneur and inventor, eventually moved on to helping other entrepreneurs through mentorship, investment, advisory, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. And you've had quite the career path, especially at a young age. And we're going to get into the details of that. But before we do, what's your net worth today?
So I'm in the 8-figure club.
Nice. And how is that broken up?
So as a kid, I was never told that you can just save your money, work a respectable job, and let compound interest do its work over some decades and achieve financial independence. So the majority of it is tied up across 3 different companies that I own.
And are those companies that essentially you founded or invested in, or a combination of both?
The majority I founded or co-founded, and to a lesser degree, ones that I've invested in.
Nice. So do you invest any money in some of the traditional vehicles, whether it be real estate or, the market or anything like that at all?
Absolutely. So I started my career in the hedge fund world, and one individual in that world that had a big impact on me had a substantial contribution in regards to coming up with financial tools and ideas. So he was one of the people that led the creation of the index fund in the 70s. So I actually started my career in finance and in the hedge fund world. And my first kind of, I guess you could say, exposure to investing was predominantly through index tracking ETFs.
And how old were you when you made your first investment in the market, essentially in the hedge fund world?
I think the first investment that I made is I bought the SPY ETF, and I was just dipping my toes in. I wanted to learn about the process, and I just wanted to be able to say that I own a piece of 500 companies. And that really got me hooked. From that point, I fell in love with the concept of compounding investing and what that could do for securing your financial future.
When did you start making the transition into entrepreneurship and being a inventor?
So growing up, I'm a first generation immigrant. So my parents came here as refugees from Poland, ended up in San Francisco, and San Francisco wasn't necessarily the most affordable place to live, and it still isn't. And it was always, money was always something on our minds, but not the most important thing, right? That was always health and family and stuff like that. But what was really ingrained in me is that you have to take some calculated risks in order to achieve financial independence at some point in time. For some people, that is investing in stocks or other things, and for other people, it's starting businesses. But that was really ingrained in me from a very young age. And I think from as early as age 6, I was very entrepreneurial. I started selling candy to my friends. By age 8 or 9, I was selling bootleg CDs with songs that I had downloaded. So I was always very entrepreneurial. But I guess they say necessity kind of breeds innovation, right?
Talk to us about moving from, you're working in hedge fund with the W-2, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about making that transition and going from, the quote unquote security of the finance world, working in the hedge fund space, which most people dream about, to becoming a founder, building business, and now at this point have done it multiple times. I mean, how did you, I know you talked about doing a few things entrepreneurially as a child, but what led you to just, hey, I'm going to do this. I've got this plan and I'm going to go make it work? Yeah,
that's a good question. So your parents are immigrants. You don't have that many acceptable options for career paths. Number one is usually doctor. Number two is usually lawyer. And then if you can't make it in either one of those, it's either accountant, money manager, like finance, that kind of stuff. So I didn't want to be a doctor, can't do blood, didn't want to be in a courthouse all day or have to memorize things like lawyers do. So the last option was really investing in the financial world. Fortunately, I was decent at that. So that was the path that I was on since I was pretty little, maybe 12 or 13. I already started experimenting with stock market simulators and buying a stock, for example. And by the time I got to university, I kind of refined those skills, refined kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And of course, when you're on a set path like that, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So I loved investing, but I didn't love the mission behind hedge funds. So I ended up in the hedge fund world, but I didn't love the fact that I was using my skills to make a very small percentage of the population that was already fairly wealthier. And I didn't feel like I was building anything or contributing anything meaningful to society. So I made a rather rash decision and I stopped doing that. I decided I wanted to build things and I want to do things that I'm proud of. And truthfully, I probably made that decision a little bit too early in my career. I'd say most founders that I know that are successful either stayed in the hedge fund world or some high earning industry until they had a substantial nest egg, or they stayed at Google or Facebook or a big FANG company made a couple $1 million on stock, then started a company. I did not do that. I quit that world and decided to clean houses for CEOs and VCs in San Francisco. So in hindsight, I suppose it's 2020, but I left the hedge fund world and financial world in general fairly early in my career and just started building things and experimenting.
And how old were you when you did that?
So I was only 22 years old.
Wow.
So I was very young. I remember vividly waking up one day, and at the time I was staying on friends' couches in San Francisco because they all got jobs and they all got apartments, and I didn't. I basically said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And thinking to myself, if I don't do this now, if I don't take the leap now, in a few years, I'm going to be really comfortable and locked into a lifestyle that I may never do it. And I think probably in hindsight, I think I was probably right about that.
Where did your parents immigrate from?
From Poland,
Wow.
in the 80s. So it was before, it was still during communism. So it was not a fun place to be during the time.
So let's talk about the first business that you leave. You have this emotional attachment to what you're doing that causes you to leave. Talk us through, like, what was that first ideation of, like, this is the company I'm going to start? Where did you get that from? Kind of walk us through the first few, little years there of getting your first business off the ground.
Yeah, and the first few businesses, and I called them projects, to be honest, because most of the value that came from them was learning experience. And today, when a young founder asks me, how do I succeed? I tell them fail twice, because mathematically, that's the simplest one sentence answer I can give them. But I did a number of different experimental projects while working kind of odd jobs. The most important thing for me is I wanted to make sure that I had my core hours of the day to work on building a business. So I always either worked before 10 a.m. or after 7 p.m. Was kind of when I took on these odd jobs. And I built or pursued companies in all kinds of different industries, some in the financial literacy industry. So going back to kind of something that was very relevant and top of mind for me, having taken that leap away from the financial world and the W-2 world. Another was in the social media space. That's when social media was still very much trying to figure out what its place in society was going to be. And being innovative, coming up with new ideas, innovating on those ideas is very different than building business. And I think the most important thing that I did was I realized that I don't really know anything, that I don't have experience. I always thought of myself as highly capable. And however, I never discounted the value of experience. So the most important thing that I sought after was I wanted to learn from people. I thought books were too far behind. By the time you publish a book, that information may not be as relevant anymore. So I actually started cleaning houses for CEOs and VCs and in San Francisco in the morning. And sometimes they would have a chat with me and give me some advice. And they would say, you don't look like my usual house cleaner. So I would actively seek kind of information, mentorship, and that kind of resulted in a few different like small projects as a result of that. But it took quite a few of those to really refine the lens that I needed to be able to identify problems that are worth solving. And then that kind of eventually turned into one of my breakout companies, which was SkunkLock.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that as a biker myself in a second, but I want to go back to this comment. You were cleaning these people's houses. Was that out of necessity? Was that out of search, some of that information? Or was it just to get close to that group of people? I mean, talk us through, like, most people are not going to go hedge fund, house cleaner, startup CEO.
Yeah, most of my friends thought I was crazy, given the fact that I spent a lot of years building the skills that fortunately I'm very thankful for. I had the opportunity to be qualified to even work at a place like a hedge fund. So they thought I was absolutely crazy when I said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So I was fortunately a very strategic person. I think even when I was younger, there was a lot of things that I didn't know anything about, but I was always very strategic, and I was always very confident in my decision making. And the decision to clean houses was twofold. I realized that I need to get closer to the people that are where I want to be in 10 years. And frankly, I couldn't afford to pay them to mentor me. I didn't even have a vehicle to get in front of them. And I didn't go to an Ivy League school or anything like that. I went to a school that gave me scholarships, my parents couldn't afford to do that either. So what I came up with that checked both boxes out of necessity, because I went from income to no income virtually overnight with no savings, which in hindsight, I don't know. We'll see how long I live for, but that did contribute to a pretty substantial amount of stress. But it solved this very important problem that I had, was that I didn't even know where to start. So when I did this, like, at least I got the opportunity to get in front of people, have a little bit of conversation, ask for some input, ask for some advice, and that was integral in shaping kind of how I was viewing entrepreneurship and innovation in the world at that point in time.
How much did you make cleaning houses? I'm just curious.
It was usually about, like, a large house, you'd make between $100 and $150
to clean to clean the house.
Yeah.
And it'd take you how long?
A morning. So you start at 6 a.m. You can maybe get done by 9 or 10.
All right, so you're making 30, 20, 25, $30 an hour basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it was enough to get by.
Yeah.
And the most important part was people wanted their houses cleaned before they left for work. They didn't want to leave you in their giant house, with
while
all
they
their
were
stuff.
gone. Yeah.
While they were gone. So, and
you're there, they're there.
Exactly.
You get conversation. You
exactly.
Pass by. Yeah. Wow.
Pass by. They're having coffee, and they were intrigued too. They're like, you are the fastest cleaner we've had, and you also don't fit the profile. So they were also intrigued, and I think that helped me build some of those relationships early on. But I think I'm a big proponent of mentorship, and I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of incredible mentors in my life, and having even that fractional mentorship through some of those relationships that I built, and some of those conversations. And it even goes back to, like, if I go back to even being a kid. So my mom is a florist. She had a flower shop in the middle of downtown San Francisco, a tiny little 8-by-8-foot flower shop, and it was, of course, in the financial district. It's also lots of very intriguing, successful people, and I remember even as a kid, I would ask some of the customers, what did they do for work? So my first exposure to, let's say, venture capital and startups was one of my mom's best friends, who was one of the OG female VCs in the industry. We're talking like the mid 90s. That was there. People are complaining there's not a lot of female VCs today. Geez, go back to 1994. So even some of the information or tidbits that I got from her stuck with me as well. So just getting that exposure was so fundamental in building my psyche and interest around that.
And how long did you clean houses for?
So I did that for a couple of years until I felt like I wasn't a complete bozo. Like, you have to a degree, when you're going to start a company, you have to get to a point psychologically where you believe that you starting a company is legitimately something good for the world, that you are uniquely qualified. Because entrepreneurship, at the end of the day, isn't about you. And it took me a couple of years to learn that. It's about society and doing something for society of value. And that's how you build a good business.
You know what's been a game changer for how I watch basketball lately? Prize Picks. I've been making daily fantasy lineups every night during the playoffs, and it's wild how much more fun it makes the games. It takes less than 30 seconds to create a lineup. I just pick a couple of players, decide whether they'll do more or less than the projected stats, and that's it. This week I've got Luka Doncic for more than 28 points and Tatum for more than 8 rebounds. We'll see if they come through for me. The Taco Tuesday discounts are a cheat code. Last week they dropped Jokic's projection by 20%. And now every lineup you make enters the Takes Two ticket sweepstakes, where you can end up sitting on the actual basketball championship game. Yeah, I'm in. They've also added the chance to win up to 2,000 times your cash. And if your lineup isn't perfect, Flex Play still lets you double your money. It's the most fun I've had watching the playoffs in years. Download the app and use code Millionaire to get $50 instantly after you play for your first $5 lineup. That's code Millionaire to get $50 instantly after you play for your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And thanks again to Prize Picks for supporting today's episode.
So let's shift gears here. Let's talk about SkunkLock. What led you to start that company, and give our listeners a little idea of what that is?
Sure. So SkunkLock was born out of the frustration that I've had, I want to say, over 7 bikes stolen in San Francisco. And the last straw was when a friend's bike was stolen, broad daylight in San Francisco. And it was a nice bike using the best lock money could buy at the time. And we're talking less than 10 seconds. The lock was cut. So that, even though it wasn't my bike, I knew that the lock that was being used was the best lock on the market. So it really struck a chord with me. And I started trying to understand, how can this happen? So, and then, I started pulling back the curtain a little bit on the industry and realized that every single lock company in the world was just blatantly lying to people about the existence of these power tools called angle grinders. And I bought an angle grinder and I bought a couple locks. And as someone that's never done construction work, I was able to cut through them in 10 seconds or less. And then I realized that, something needs to change here. And my primary goal of myself and my co-founder in this particular case in the early days was not making a bunch of money. It was actually exposing the existing lock companies for their lies and deceit, and the fact they're actively hiding these power tools because they knew they existed. And that's why we launched a bicycle lock that exploded with noxious vomit-inducing chemicals. It was the metaphorical Molotov cocktail to that industry. It had to be extreme and it had to get attention. Number one goal was bring attention to the problem because most people weren't even problem aware at the time. We also invented the first uncuttable lock or virtually uncuttable lock, but we didn't release that until much later because frankly, that wasn't as important as making people aware of the problem. So that was really the first breakout company because I think we identified something that most people weren't aware of and came up with a solution for it that was pretty radical for the time.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So at this point, what startup or what business are you focusing on the most?
So I've kind of come full circle at this point and come back to something I've been really passionate about. So when I get asked actually pretty often, like, what's your number? When are you going to be happy financially? And the truth is, when you didn't grow up with money, you don't need a whole lot of money to be happy. Like, there's only so many toys you can buy, right? And I started thinking about that, and I realized nothing would make me happier more than helping as many people as possible achieve financial independence and financial security. Because my family always struggled to achieve financial security. You need both to work hard, have an income, and you also need to make the right decisions. And it's not always that easy for the latter. So my mission more recently has been to help democratize both strategies that will help people achieve financial independence sooner in their lives, and promote financial education. And we're kind of living in a new paradigm in some ways, because 50 years ago, you could get by working hard, making money, and saving. It wasn't an absolute necessity to invest in order to achieve financial security or retire. Today, it is a virtual impossibility without investing and benefiting from compound interest. And I will go even further and say it's a necessity to not only invest, but also protect your investments from significant losses during market volatility. And most people don't know this. So, like, the secret behind SkunkLock was most people didn't know that angle grinders existed, and any lock that existed could be cut in less than 10 seconds. Well, the big glaring secret in the financial industry is that when you ask 10 people a simple question, when your retirement portfolio loses 50%, what percentage do you need just to get your money back? The vast majority of people will say 50%. And that's the intuitive shotgun answer. But when they really think about it, they go back and say, wait, it's not 50%. It's 100%. You need to, at that point, double your money just to get your life savings back. And this non-linear mathematical principle has been used by the investment industry now for decades to propagate myths, frankly, that only benefit hedge funds, for example, such as stocks eventually will recover. Well, guess what? You think hedge funds are waiting for stocks to recover? Absolutely not, right? It's in the name. What does hedging mean? Hedging literally, quite literally, the reason hedge funds were invented to exist was to hedge, which means reduce losses, because you don't need these outrageous returns. Like, these brokerages encourage you, and these investing apps, they encourage you to take these outlandish risks with the hopes of doubling your money and tripling your money on penny stocks and or meme coins, etc. But you don't actually need to do that to achieve financial independence by your 40s, 50s, or 60s, as long as you reduce your losses in significant market volatility events, 2020, 2022, 2008 before that, 2001 before that. You can potentially retire as much as 20 years earlier, just because of this principle that losses are not do not have a linear relationship with gains required to get your retirement back. I mean, imagine trying to retire in 2022, right?
Stace, when we first started selling online, I thought the hardest part was going to be finding the right product. But it turns out selling it, actually converting visitors into buyers, is the real challenge. That's where Shopify completely changed the game. Before Shopify, I was juggling too many tools, dealing with clunky checkouts, and constantly chasing abandoned carts. Now, I've got one platform that powers everything. Beautiful storefront, smooth checkout, mobile friendly. It just works. Shopify isn't just an e-commerce tool, it's the business behind the business. It powers household names like Thrive Cosmetics, Death Wish Coffee, even Skims by Kim Kardashian. And there's a reason. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They've got the #1 checkout on the planet, and with Shop Pay, conversions jump up to 50%. That means fewer abandoned carts and a lot more of this. Cha-ching. And because Shopify lets you sell everywhere, online, in person, on social, at events, your business meets your customers wherever they're scrolling and strolling. It's no secret. Businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Thrive Cosmetics and Skims use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/unveiled, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/unveiled to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/unveiled.
Pretty crazy. So you talked a little bit about not really having, a number or anything, but where do you go from here? I mean, is it always about building at this point for you? I mean, you're super young still, or how do you think about the next, several decades of your life? Do you have an outlook for that or a plan?
Yeah. So I'm pretty heavily involved in a company now. Technically, it's a registered investment advisor, and it's helping people get access to some of these investment strategies that previously individuals with less than, let's say, 8 figures would not have access to. They would need to qualify as a qualified investor or credit investor and access them through a hedge fund. But I'm a big believer that with these strategies, we can potentially help tens of millions of people secure their financial futures, especially today when there's so much uncertainty with Social Security that is expected to start seeing significant reductions in 2034 when as much as 1/3 of Americans have to go back to work that have already retired. And there's a very high probability, unless there's a change to the fundamental investment approaches and models, that the vast majority of not just individuals investing in the stock market, but existing advisors. So another thing people don't realize is the existing models for investing are mostly based on concepts, theories that were essentially developed in the 50s. So anyone can Google Harry Markowitz, and Harry Markowitz did his PhD thesis on portfolio selection, and that eventually developed into what's called modern portfolio theory. Obviously, the world has changed pretty substantially since 1952, and I'm a big believer that the models will need to adapt to the needs and expectations of the modern investor if we're going to stay true to the common, knowledge or promise that's being told to people, which is just buy a basket of stocks and bonds or invest in the SPY S&P 500 ETF 60/40, which lost a significant amount of principal in 2022. And they're being told, don't worry, on average, it'll return 8%. And I think that's a dangerous thing to assume, considering the change in economic regime. We're entering a very different world. And keep in mind, there was decades where if you were invested, you would have had negative returns in a diversified portfolio. So 8% is great, but I think there is some risk in believing that if you invest the current methodologies that exist, that are very widespread by most financial advisors, for example, there's a big risk that you may not see that 8% over the next 40 years, even though you may have seen that in the last.
Yeah, super interesting discussion. Let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's the most expensive pair of shoes or pants that you purchased?
Shoes. Do you mean what kind of shoes, or do you mean how much?
How much, or both?
About 1,500.
And what kind?
Hermes.
Nice.
I'm generally speaking not necessarily a huge brand person because I'm a value driven person, but I think that is one brand that the quality represents the value and the cost.
Okay. What about the most expensive meal out?
So most expensive meal out, I'm not a huge Michelin star go eat expensive meals person, to be honest. I grew up on street tacos and ethnic foods. Sometimes when I go to a Michelin star restaurant, I'll go pick up some mapo tofu after. But probably excluding drinks, maybe 1,000.
Okay. What about the most expensive car or toy?
Also not a car person. I'm a motorcycle person. So I got I have a Ducati, and I have this like Batmobile looking car called a Slingshot. And so, I mean,
those are fun.
Very fun. And, I have friends that have supercars and we'll pull up to a light together. And I have my ridiculous looking 3-wheel car and they have a Lamborghini. I get the high fives from the people walking in the crosswalk. So I think I'm just not really, I'm an investor at heart. I hate buying things that are losing money every single day that you own them. I think at some point I might get into classic cars, but I have watches that cost more than my cars, probably.
What's the most expensive watch you got then?
Probably a Blanc Pan that I have.
You remember how much that was?
In the 20K, a little
Okay, so
little
not
more
crazy.
than 20K, maybe. Not crazy. Keep in mind, like I still have to be able to go home and not have my parents yell at me for doing stupid crap. You know, like I still value my life, right? So yeah, I do. I'm very responsible with my spending. I have a few nice belts and like some nice clothes, but honestly, all of that stuff, every single decision I make is this worth the expense? Is the quality reciprocal or to the cost?
Okay. How did you make your first buck?
My first ever buck.
Yeah.
My first ever buck. I grew up in by the time I was, I think, 6, I moved to an apartment complex in South of Market neighborhood, and I realized that on Halloween there was over 300 apartments in that complex. So within 4 hours, I can trick or treat 300 apartments and have multiple bags of candy, and I would actually sell that candy to my friends. So I think the first like real money I made, and by real money I mean like over $100, which was a lot more back then. You can actually buy something for $100. Was selling candy.
Okay. What's your favorite thing to spend money on?
Favorite thing to spend money on? That's a great question. I'm a big wine collector because there is very little risk to collecting wine. And this is kind of how I got into the tequila business as well. So I also own a tequila company, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But I love spending money on investment grade wine because I know that even if I lose money on the wine, I can open the wine and drink it. I can't open my Apple stock and drink it, or my portfolio. So big fan of that. And that kind of transition to my newest invention, which I invented a tequila that actually ages inside the bottle. So it actually gets better and smoother and more interesting in the bottle, and it goes up in value like wine. So I guess that's a fun one for me, is building collections.
Okay. What's the craziest thing that you ever spent money on?
I don't know if it's crazy. I mean, I guess buying a baby grand piano was kind of crazy, only because I already had 2 pianos. I love composing music and producing music and stuff like that. But I think just a couple of the things that were like just plain toys were I bought one of these masks, the Iron Man masks, and I bought a lightsaber that was it was a little expensive for what it is, probably.
Okay. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to earn money?
Oh, that I have a story. So when I was building my company, and at this point, I wasn't cleaning houses as much anymore. The company was just like in the early stages, but I needed to. At that point, I already stopped sleeping on friends' couches, stopped living with my grandparents. So I had rented a room, and I needed money to make rent. So I needed to do something. A friend of mine told me about a commercial he's auditioning for, and I initially said, "Oh, that sounds cool," and then he told me, "You should try out. It could be fun. We'll go together." And then I'm like, "No, I'm not an actor, right?" And then he's like, "Well, they're paying $500." I'm like, "I guess I can be an actor." So I essentially, lack of a better word, bullshit my way into a commercial with zero acting experience, and
That's awesome.
and it paid my rent for that month. And then I realized this isn't that hard. So I ended up in like a Volkswagen commercial, a Honda commercial, a Mike's Hard Lemonade commercial. I ended up being an extra in the Ant-Man movie.
Oh, wow.
So it spurred kind of like a weekend warrior kind of situation for me, where I was doing acting gigs to pay the bills, and alongside that I was also playing piano for events, and
Jack
doing
of all trades. I love it.
Yeah, out of necessity, I guess. Like avoiding giving up your 9 to 5 hours. That was critical. If I can do it after 6 p.m. or before 9 a.m., game on. But when you decide you want to be entrepreneur, if you're actually serious, you can't give up your prime mental hours to doing something. That's why I tell people you have to quit your job if you're serious about this.
Yeah. What's a closely held belief that you once had that you recently changed your mind on?
Oh, that's a good one. Closely held belief. Geez, I changed my mind so often that's a really, really tough one for me. Wow, that is a good one. What to say? I'm curious. What have other people said for a question like this? Because
it's all
like,
over the board.
I'm like ruthlessly open-minded, and I do not tie my emotions to my beliefs at all.
Mm-hmm.
So if you show me otherwise, I change my mind immediately. It's my beliefs are. I try to not be emotional about my beliefs. But I think, I have one answer to this. So I grew up going to a Catholic school, and I was always lukewarm religious, let's call it. Parents are from Poland, and I know it's very polarizing. Most people are either very pro organized religion or very against it. And I think biggest change that I've had, which was I do not want to necessarily be very religious, is I changed my mind into believing that I think religion for some people is not a bad thing. I think there's some good that comes out of that through community building and encouraging certain, morals, etc. But that also goes into a can of worms of, other things, whether religion should influence politics and whatnot. But I think that's one thing where I've warmed up to is what religion's role is in society, and how I perceive that.
Awesome. Any last pieces of advice for somebody who's just starting out on their journey?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice is have a little bit of financial security before you start. Don't be quite as irresponsible as me. But and then the second one is start saving and investing. Check out what I'm building. It's called Side Pocket. Read all the white papers. It's one of those things where we live in a society today where you need to have some level of financial security, because at the end of the day, it's about how much time you have to do the things you want to do, spend time with family, to take care of your health, and money is an enabler to do all those things. And the sooner you start learning about it and start saving and participating as an investor in the markets, as an investor in innovation, the better off, or the sooner you're going to be able to get to a place where you can really do the things you want to do. So that's kind of the dream. And my family is kind of an example of the American dream. So I have a tendency to be very optimistic. And then the second thing is be very strategic with taxes and how you approach that. And then the last is get good mentors. Great mentors will help you achieve what you want in life faster. Because I've never heard anyone say that I want to do X, Y, and Z when I'm 82 years old. And what mentors do is they cut the time it will take for you to achieve everything you want to achieve from 50 years to 20 or 10 in some cases. So actively look for mentors.
Awesome. That's Daniel with a net worth of $10+ million. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Really insightful questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Jace Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website, millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.